why is that person surrounding themselves with pieces of crap? Because that's what they really think about themselves. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a person who confirms what you think about yourself. Not what you say about yourself, not what you act like, but what you actually think about yourself. What would be a hobby, like an example of something like that? I just don't give a shit about piano playing. You want me to sit there and listen to someone talk about piano playing in their day for a whole hour?
I want you to at least try to care.
Oh God, why? Piano sucks.
Because I care about it.
Oh. So it isn't really about caring about the thing, it's about caring about the person and what they care about. Okay. So it's not only caring about the piano, but, sorry, piano is important to this person is important to me, they like talking about it, so it's more about listening to the person talk about it and finding an interest in the person and not the subject. Okay. Okay, that makes sense, I suppose. Okay. What are the kinds of things would conversations have to be had about? I'm thinking of one right now. A friend of mine is guy he's like neck deep in. He's very political, and he's been dating this girl for a little over a year, and they start talking about politics, and it's ugly. And he's just like, dude, like we're just not even just like on opposite sides of things, but like dramatically so. And he's just saying like, I don't know, I feel like I've wasted a year. I'm like, yeah, probably. I mean, if this stuff is important to you, why didn't you talk about this stuff earlier in the relationship? And he's like, because it causes fights. It's like, well, is it better to have a fight on the first date, or is it better to have a fight a year and 2 months in? You know, it doesn't mean that you can't get along if you have political differences. Just like it doesn't mean you can't get along if you have differences in a lot of areas of interest. It's about seeing it in the right way. So for example, just to tell you, piano doesn't suck. I love piano. I wish I could play piano. If you think I can't sing, you should hear me play piano. I'm even worse at that. But it isn't really so much about whether or not you care about piano, it's about caring about the person who's talking about the piano. It isn't whether or not you care about gardening. Does anybody here care about gardening? Flowers and stuff like that? I don't care about that. But if you love a person enough, you'll want to listen. I like flowers, clearly. I mean, I hang on to them as long as they're around. That's because flowers are like people. They're more beautiful when they're dead. But people will talk about flowers with such incredible passion. I don't really have an interest in it. I just want to cut them and put them in a vase and stare at them. But if you like a person enough, or if you care about a person enough, you care not so much it's not like all of a sudden you start caring about gardening. Is that you care about the person who's talking about the gardening and the ways in which they're talking about it. That's when you know things start to divide out, when a person is talking about the things that are important to them and you're no longer paying attention to it. You're now tuned out and you're just waiting for them to stop talking. Because when that happens, you're creating a situation of loneliness. Because as we know, loneliness isn't not having nobody around to talk to. It's about not being able to share the things that are important to you with the people who are around you. And so if you care about flowers and nobody wants to hear you talk about flowers, it creates a sense of alienation and loneliness. So I guess that becomes the question. Do you want to create a sense of alienation and loneliness within your relationship? And also, are you willing to be in a relationship in which loneliness and alienation is being fostered? In other words, if you're the person who's talking about the flowers and nobody cares about the flowers, are you willing to stay in that relationship knowing this person does not care about the things that are important to me? But again, think about how we frame that. It isn't that the person doesn't care about the things that are important to you. The person doesn't care about you enough to listen to the things that are important to you. And we'll try to kind of displace it because the truth is going to hurt in that case. Because the truth is the person doesn't care enough about you to hear you talk about those things. It isn't they don't care about the thing. They obviously don't care about the thing, but they don't care about you enough to talk about the things that are important to you. And that doesn't mean they have to become an expert in it. It doesn't mean they have to all of a sudden study whatever, piano or flowers or whatever. It's that they have to care enough to study you, to get to know you. And the only way you can get you can be known is to share yourself and have that received. And so it isn't about finding a perfect person, because again, when we begin that statement, nobody's perfect, of course no one's perfect. Nobody claims to be perfect. Well, that's not true. I know a couple people. But most of the time, people don't claim to be perfect. What it is about seeing a person in a perfect way, not to see them as perfect, because that's also a recipe for disaster. You take a person and you put them on a pedestal and you say, this person has no flaws. Oh my God, I'm so in love. This person is absolutely perfect. But you know they're not. So you know you're speaking a lie. So you know that you're beginning the relationship with a lie. And that's the foundation. So what happens when that person, because you admire that person and you love that person because they're perfect, you're going to find out, of course, that they're not. Little chips will happen. And suddenly now that perfection breaks away and you see them as just like everybody else, because you never got to know the real them. You put something into them. You built something into them. Like that's why I was asking earlier about what your expectations are for people. Because if your expectations for people are incredibly high, nobody can ever meet that expectation, well, or worse yet, I know some of you are like this. I see your relationships. You guys walk in the hallways. I see people who, friends of mine also, I've known lots of people who are dating a very, very imperfect person. Some people who are almost as far away from imperfect as you can possibly get. And yet they sit and they go, I don't care. I think they are, and you start to build them up in your mind and you create an idol. You build them up into this thing that you can worship. That's got nothing to do with the person. It's got to do with you, how you see that person. But then don't be surprised when that person lets you down. I was talking to a friend of mine like a year or two ago or so, and she was dating someone and she just says, he's really smart. And I've talked to the guy once or twice before. I go, is he? And sometimes that's all you have to do is just ask a question, a couple of words, and put a question mark at the end. Is he though? Really? Is he smart? Well, he's not. And all of a sudden, as soon as you hear someone change their tone of voice, they know they're wrong. Well, he's not. Okay. Then you know he's not. So then don't build them up that way. But what that does tell you, of course, is that you do want somebody smart. And then, of course, this person says, but he's also very nice. And the thing is, I didn't know if he was or not. And I just asked, is he though? I even put my hands in my pockets afterwards. Is he though? And she says, well, he's nice to people. He starts to qualify it. I go, okay, so he's not particularly smart. He's not particularly nice. But the fact that you're building those things into him as an idol tells me that you want somebody who is smart and who is nice. You're just really hoping that this person can either grow into your expectations or that you can remain that willfully blind to your relationship, that you can start to hope that they are those things and you just don't see it. But it's a lot of settling. A lot of people just settle because people are so terrified of being alone. People sometimes are so just enamored of the idea that somebody likes them, that they're just, so afraid of being alone that they just end up there. And I don't need to tell anybody this. You can look around and see a lot of that in life. Sometimes you look at people and you're like, why is that person with that other person? The other person treats them this way. The other person acts like that, or some things, and it's such a mismatch, oftentimes. And that's because we haven't established what it is in our mind those expectations actually are. I was talking to a friend of mine, like 6 months ago or so, and she was asking me if I thought that her expectations for people were too high. Like, how do you answer that? No. Lower your expectations. Degrade yourself. No, of course not. If your expectations are very high, then good. Only make sure that you're living up to the same expectations that you set. In other words, if you're saying this, it's important for a person to be this good, then now you have a goal for yourself. Aim yourself towards that. Because if you are that, that's what you're going to attract. If you pretend to be that, or if you suggest to be that, but you're not that, you're going to attract the exact same thing. Someone who pretends to be that or someone who suggests to be that way. Like I'm thinking of somebody who I know, in fact, God, more than one person I know who's like this, where they will, they talk about themselves sorry, thinking of somebody specific right now. They set themselves up as like, I'm this, I'm educated, I'm this, I'm that. And then they surround themselves with people who are just not, I'm not gonna say it, pieces of crap. I guess you can call it that. Why is that person surrounding themselves with pieces of crap? Because that's what they really think about themselves. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a person who confirms what you think about yourself. Not what you say about yourself, not what you act like, but what you actually think about yourself. If you think very highly of yourself, and I mean not in an arrogant way, but you really do think highly of yourself, and not like I'm going to say it, I'm going to speak into existence, I'm going to pump myself up, but like you actually believe very highly about yourself. You can look at yourself and say, I'm smart. Why? Because I've worked hard to become smart. Not born this way, or anything, but I've worked hard to become this way. I'm hardworking. I've demonstrated that through a work ethic. I'm moral. I know that because I have a pattern in my life of doing the right thing. In other words, if it's a character for yourself that you've established and you have a good reason to think that about yourself, you will surround yourself with people who are like that. And you will end up with a person who confirms that about you. Not necessarily a person who's going to earn as much money as you, not necessarily a person who's going to have the same work ethic as you or whatever, but a person who complements those aspects of yourself and confirms what you think about yourself. And you're going to find, if you end up in a relationship with a person who doesn't, treats you less than, you won't stay. Not because you're going to swing your head around and post on Instagram about how you know your worth, but because you're going to be uncomfortable in that situation. It's just not going to feel right. Similarly, by the way, and some of you maybe know people like this, you think very low of themselves. You think very low of themselves. And yet someone comes along and treats them very well, and you might look at that and be like, wow, this person does not deserve the other person. They'll ruin it. It will get ruined in some way eventually, because in the same way, it's uncomfortable. If you think lowly of yourself, you'll be with someone who thinks lowly of you. And even if you, again, act like you think highly of yourself, even if you pretend like you think highly of yourself, if you really think lowly of yourself, you will end up with a person who confirms that about you. Of course, if you think well of yourself, you'll end up with a person who confirms that about you. So the point is to give yourself a reason to think highly of yourself. Because you're not perfect. Nobody is, of course, but you can see yourself perfectly. I know what I am, and I build myself up. Not what I pretend to be, what I actually am. And then the other person comes around, it's like gravity, man. It's a weak force of the universe. It just happens. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Tuesday.